Okay, I hope I'm recording. I think the little light is flashing, so I think I'm recording. Okay, so I have a list. I have a list of commands here. These are the three main commands. There's going to be some other commands that I'll show you along the way too, but primarily I want to show you how to use the orient command, both orient and orient 3-point. And then I want to show you how to unroll surfaces so that you can transition from your digital model to your physical model more easily. And we'll be making a net. A net is basically a flattened version of your three-dimensional object that you can then print out and fold up. Okay, so I've started here. Let's see. I'm gonna just zoom select on that, and I'm gonna resave that view. And I'm going to reset it. So I really like to, I also just want to talk about some just general good practice modeling tips to get in the hang of. The first is, if I'm going to be making a lot of prints of isometric views, I want to just save that view so that I can easily get back to it and not try to go through the drop down menu or whatever you do to get the isometric view. So I like to use my named views panel, and I would advise that you do too. So I can still do whatever I want with this, but then whenever I want to go back to it, I could just click on that and it just takes me right back there. So I know what my drawing will end up looking like, right? That's one thing. The second thing is that, you always want to make sure that you're in the proper units. I'm in feet, and I like my display distance to be feet and inches. So that's another thing. And then, so I'm going to make a really quick unit. I'm going to aggregate it into a grid, and then we'll unroll it and talk about the net. Okay. So I'm just going to keep this fairly simple. I'm going to create a 9x9 by 18 rectangular prism. So now that I've specified the first corner in my box, you just hit the @ and now I can specify X and Y dimensions from that first point. So now I'll do 9x9. I know my dimension, I know my units are in feet. So whenever I plug in a number, it automatically assumes that it is feet. So 9x9, and then I'll go 18 up. So this thing will be like 2 cubes, one stacked on top of the other. And then I'll give it a little bit of roof. I'll give it a little character with its roof, and I'll just do something. I'm using my snaps, right? So you want to make sure that you're always using your snaps. I'm going to go corner to corner to midpoint, and then also, instead of closing this like this, what I like to do is just hit C and enter, and it will close it for you. That way, when you select on that curve and look in your object properties, right? You always want to have your properties palette up. I'm not worried about layers in this tutorial, but your object properties will tell you what you're dealing with. So now that I have that selected, I know I can look up here at my object type, and I know it's a closed curve. So typically when somebody comes to me and has problems with their geometry in Rhino, that's the first thing I look at is, okay, what geometry are we dealing with? And this will tell you if it's grouped. It will tell you if it varies. Like, so for example, if I add the extrusion, now my object type will say varies. If I group these two together, which typically I don't like to group items in Rhino, now it will tell me that the object type varies and it's also grouped. So I highly recommend that you all get used to using your object properties palette, because it will tell you a lot of what you need to know. So now I'll just ungroup them, and I will mirror. I'm going to do a little gable roof, but I'm going to make it corner to corner. I'm going to mirror this, and then I'll select those two, and I'll use them to trim. Well, I could do this any number of ways. Maybe I'll just trim it piece by piece here. And I'll select the other side. Repeat trim. Whoops. All right, it's trimmed up. Now I can go ahead and turn those curves into surfaces. Remember, whatever the geometry is that you want to make, that's how you determine what drop down you use. So I want to make a surface right now. So I'm going to use my surface drop down. These are all ways in which you can make surfaces in Rhino. There's many, many ways. I know that's a planar curve because it's a triangle. So I'm going to use planar curves, and it will give me a surface. Now I'll select the other curve that is also closed and hit return to repeat last command. So now, now if I grab all this stuff, it says varies. I want it to say, I'm going to delete my curves here. Another way in which you can select geometry, if you want to like select by type, you can easily just go up here into edit, select objects. And then these are all ways that you can select things. So you could select all the points, you can select all the curves. So now I can just select all the curves and it tell me, oh, I've got 3 curves selected. Okay, I don't want to get rid of my boundaries, so I'll command click on that to deselect it from the selection set, and then I'll delete. And now when I select this, my object properties still tells me it varies, but I think that's just because this is an open polysurface and this is a trimmed surface. Now, you probably know this, but for selecting objects, it matters whether you drag right or you drag left. So right is a solid line. So there's a solid line around that box. This selects everything that is within the window, versus when I drag left, it's a dashed line in that box, and that selects everything that's touching the window. So that's a way that you can often select from a group. So I'm just going to select all these and join them. And because I want it to be a closed polysurface, so this is now a closed solid polysurface. It's a very simple shape. Looks kind of like a tooth. And now you can, let's talk about the grid for a minute. You can customize your grid and you can have full control over it in Rhino. And because I have a 9x9 object, but my major grid lines are 10x10, but this is a unit that I want to aggregate on the site, it might be nice to customize my grid to more accurately reflect my unit. So I will do that. And I will type in grid. And here are my grid properties. I will apply this to all viewports. And instead of my major line interval at every 10 feet, I will do it every 9 feet. So I'm kind of just customizing my grid, and then I'll say done. And now if you notice, oh, done. Now if you notice here, when I move my object into the field of the site, it's kind of sits on a grid that's tailored to it. Okay, so now let's talk about the first command on the list, and that is the orient command. The orient command is when you're going from 2D to 2D and you're working in the same plane. So I'll show you what I mean by that right now. And the orient command has other commands nested within it. So copy and scale, you can copy and scale at the same time. We'll copy. So I'm going to type in my command orient. And one thing about the orient command, both orient and orient 3-point, is that it has reference and target points that you need to specify. And you need to make sure that you need to make sure that you do that in the same order. The order matters a lot. If you don't get the order right, it will be very frustrating, this command. And it may be frustrating to you the first couple times you try it, but once you get the hang of it, very handy. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to select 1 point and then 2 points, and now I'm going to start my target points. I want to make copies, and I do not want to scale, but you could also scale if you wanted to. So I'm just going to go ahead and start placing this on the site. I'm going to try to get 12 of them down. And I'm going to alternate. And I'm going to alternate here. Okay. And I'm using my custom grid. And I'm just alternating which way the ridge goes. And this may or may not be a good idea in the long run, but I'm not too worried about it because this is just for fun. And I have my grid snaps on. Okay. And now I'm going to right click and finish that out. I'm going to move this off to the side a little bit. Remember, I can go back to my isometric. They're kind of they're off my grid a little bit. Oh, you know, when you make, I've realized this, that when you make save a view, it also saves the state of that view. So it saves the grid that's associated with that view. So I just reverted back to the 10-foot increment grid. So I need to go ahead and change that really quick. And then I will select all this stuff, drag left, zoom selected, save. I'm going to save this view. override it. We'll move this group so that it sits on the site. Okay. Great. Here are my 12 sleeping modules. That is Orient. So that's the nice thing about Orient command. Now let's talk about the unroll surface. So you need to have, in order for the unroll to work properly, you need to have a kind of a single object that is a closed, or I guess it doesn't have to be closed, but it probably should be a poly surface because you want the parts to stick together. So I'm just going to unroll this thing and see how it works. So it's unroll surface is the command. I don't want it to be, I don't want to explode it. I don't need labels. I'm not worried about the properties. So I'm going to select, I'm going to say, I don't have any curves or points on that object that I want to unroll with the surface. So that's fine. So I'm just going to hit enter. And it gives us our net. So here's the net. And one thing, so now I'm going to work in top view. That this net is a 2D object. I'm going to change to shaded view. So, yeah, I'm going to change to shaded view. So what I want you to be very comfortable with is once you produce this net, it's going to kind of create it randomly, but you need to be able to control and optimize it so that the seams and the versus the folds happen where you want them. So for example, this is, I'm going to explode this. This is the base, right? This is the square base. Here's one side. Here's another side. Here's one of those roof facets. So right now, these are all going to be seams versus this will be a fold, right? So, but maybe I don't want a seam like right on the top of this little guy. Like maybe I don't want a seam right there. Maybe I want a fold or a score and a fold here instead of two surfaces coming together. So once you have your net, you can go ahead and manipulate it. So I will use the rotate command and I'll choose pivot points. I'm going to turn my grid snap off because I don't need my grid right now. And sometimes you can get messed up if you're using your grid. I'm going to do that again. So right now I'm just folding this thing around until I get the net that I want. I'm going to take this one as well and fold it because that's the ridge of my massing. So I want to keep that intact. All right, so that actually looks pretty good. So let's rotate that whole thing. Orthogonal to the grid. I'll just hold down my shift to turn ortho on. Could move that down a little bit. So here's my net. So here's the four sides. We only have, and maybe I actually want to move this one over like so. So I like that a little bit better. Now I have my kind of seams. mostly around the base and up one side and on in between the roof and the wall. So you have to control that. I want you all to be able to control that, be able to manipulate that so that you can get your pattern the way you want it or the net the way you want it. Yeah.
Is there a way to make adjustments to like unroll first when it's folded back? Or are all of those things made before that?
What kind of adjustments are you talking about? Oh yeah, I'll show you that next. Yeah. So now that this is kind of the way I want it, I will join the parts back together so that it says one open, so it's an open poly surface. And then I will make 2D. And here's my, wait a minute. Wait a minute. It's not what I wanted. I'm gonna, sorry, because those bits are planar, it didn't pick up that seam. So I will just keep it exploded. And then I'll make 2D again. There we go. So here's my net. I can go ahead and print this. Notice I've gotten rid of all those ISO curves, those pesky ISO curves. But if you want to know, you can select that in object properties. You can deselect show ISO curves. And you can also do it like that if you don't want to make 2D. I just like that the line work seems a little easier to work with for me rather than the surfaces. So now I can print this at quarter scale, right? These models should be quarter scale. So this will fit on an 11 by 17. Your object should, you want to, that's another restriction, right? You want to make your net so that it fits on an 11 by 17. And then it should be super easy to cut this thing out, score, and fold it together. Put some magic tape, put a piece or two of magic tape on there, and bingo. You can make, like, you print this out 12 times at the free printer and just make all of your little units when it comes time, right? Don't have to make 12 for Wednesday. Just make one updated module. Okay, so what's next? Next is I want to talk about openings, windows and doors. All right, so let's add the windows and doors to the net, and then I'll show you how to reorient those onto your unit or your module or your pod or whatever the heck we're calling this thing, your tooth. So let's say, well, first of all, let's do the door. So the door is 32 by 80. Correct me if I'm wrong. So at 32 for the X, I need to specify inches, comma, 80 for the Y, inches, enter. So this is my maximum door size. I'm going to go ahead and move that. And I will just keep this. I don't know where I need to put it. So I'm just going to put it there for now. Can make adjustments later. And then I will make a circle. I'm going to try to get fancy here and put it in the center of this triangle. Maybe it will work, maybe it won't. I don't know if it will find the center of it. Well, I'll get it close. We won't worry about it being too perfect. All right, so say I want to have a circular window in my equilateral triangle. So there's my window and door, and I can just print this template and cut those out and see how it looks. But if I want to test this out on my digital model, I can do that as well. So let's do that. And I'm just trying to figure out, okay, so the door is going to go here and the window is going to go on this side. But maybe I want my window on this side. Okay, we could change that up. Not a big deal. So rather than trying to draw a door on a vertical surface, which is kind of a pain in the butt, because you're not working on the construction plane. Whenever you draw off of the construction plane, it's a little tricky. Unless you reorient your construction plane, which I tend not to do because I'm maybe a little lazy. But I like this process because it transitions between 2 and 3D, and you have a lot more control. So you select what you want to orient. You type in orient, but instead of orient, you want to orient 3 points. So now instead of 2 reference points, you've got 3 reference points, which makes it a little trickier. But you got to remember, it's got to be the same exact order. So I always do the corner and then I go X and Y. I just try to keep it consistent. So I'm going to do the corner 1, then I'm going to go X and Y on that face. And then I'm going to do the same thing over here. I'm going to go corner. I've got copy selected. So I got the corner. Now I'm going to do X and Y. And now I've transferred my door from my net to my model. Done, right click. So now I can easily just select that curve and trim out that door and start to look at, see if I like that, right? I kind of do. So now I'm going to do the same thing with the circle, but this one is a little trickier, right? Because it's a sloped surface. It's not really trickier. So let's go ahead and do the orient 3-point again. And again, it's the corner, X and Y, corner, X and Y. And now that circle will be exactly on that plane, right? It'll be perfectly on that plane, which will make it really easy to use as an object for trimming. And now I have my my oculus. Pretty cool. Now now we could also go back and do that for all of these, but I would probably just take this once I've kind of figured out what I want my openings, how I want my openings, then you can repopulate this. But you can imagine how that will start to look in this model. One of the things for any kind of skylights that you're adding to your project, you just kind of general rule of thumb, you want to face them to the north, because like this window is in the north, you don't get a lot of direct sunlight into it, even though you get a lot of light in it. So you want light, you don't want direct light. Right now we actually have a little bit, but notice it only really happens in the evenings as we get closer to summer, maybe a little bit in the mornings too, but mostly the sun is over here, right? So general rule for skylights, north facing slopes. You'll still get some sunlight in, but or direct light in, but you want to try to minimize that. Okay. Couple commands there. Orient, unroll surface, and orient 3-point. What do you guys think? Have any questions? I hope I was recording that. Mhm.